divine grace is scanta totale isi optiverante samsumvaki. Jaiva Vishnu Paramaham Purificado, Stursissima divine grace, Ego Visitante, Ser Sati Kuamarasti, Sirata Vidasa Korki, Prem Se Hosi Krishna Chaitanya Pavurikinanda, Sri Advaita Grahasi Vasri Go Bhaktivindaki, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Simon Sundara Kunigiri Govardhanaki, Vindam Ki, Madho Yadam Ki, Navri Dham Ki, Shamonamai Ki, Gangamai Ki, Rasi Devi Ki, Bhakti Devi Ki, Tamavera Bhaktivindaki, Glory God, glory to Samir Bhuti, Glory God, glory to Samir Bhuti, Glory God, glory to Sigaru and Sri Guru. Mama Shivaya, Shivaya, Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasari Gaura-Bhakta. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. ISKCON Brahmacharya Sri Prabhupada ki jai. It's a enlightenment. It's Kalatanta. I was just thinking about it just a few days ago, because I was in some of the countries that we had a chance to serve in together. We just got back a few days back. So I wanted to speak briefly in relationship to just some of the things that's been happening recently. It's quite exciting, one aspect of it, since September the 11th. And I want to read basically a short article some of you may have seen on ABC News. It was on the you may have saw on the computer on one of the right now. Well, I think it's being handled, but that's not. But we want to share this, as it has some interesting things in relationship to how many people are accessing a deeper spirituality. Just yesterday, I was just finishing some last things to a new book. And I was looking at, first, how there's so many similarities, common things that we know that we all have as part of the human race. And looking at also the differences. Now, we know in terms of similarities that we are sane, that we're spiritual entities who are undergoing mature experiences. We realize the soul is the same in a man and a woman. The soul is the same in an American, an Indian, and an European, an African, etc. But that there are so many differences. We realize we have certain inherent desires, innate needs, and aspirations. Just as a modern psychology, and we look at Western conception versus the Vedic and Eastern. In modern psychology, we find that there are certain distinct needs that each individual has, as well as each society. The most basic level is, of course, the need for physical pursuits, physical satisfaction, physical stimulation, the need for food, the need for shelter, need for air, need for water. You see, basically, this is most primarily what's basic. And when that's satisfied, then Western scholarship says that there's a need for safety. Once people have those basic things to maintain life, then they want to be able to see that there's future satisfaction and stimulation, so there is shelter, safety, that will help to provide such, or keep such things coming and going. And then next there's a need for socialization, or social affiliation. Unless someone is unhealthy, mentally dysfunctional, then naturally they're going to pursue their physical needs. They're going to want to maintain that for the present or the future. And they're going to want want to be with other people who can assist them in what they're trying to pursue and trying to function as a living entity. So some type of gathering, some type of community, some type of doing is there. And when those needs are met, then there is the need for self-esteem. Everyone in a healthy state of mind wants to feel valued, wants to feel that their life has meaning, that they are part of a family, part of an institution, part of a community, that they have some importance. And when people do not feel that, then of course there's a big problem. Like we know that if one does not feel somehow good about their environment, one does not feel good about themselves, one does not feel happy about their situation, then how the mind affects the body, affects consciousness, affects their psycho, their physical, and even their spiritual acceleration. If one does not feel, for instance, good, then the body emanates adrenaline. The adrenaline hardens the arteries, it raises the blood pressure, and it attacks the organs and causes all kinds of problems with the physical body. When one feels good about things, then endorphins are emanated through the body, and they're natural painkillers, and they strengthen the immune system. And we know we're not the body, but it helps the body be less of an interference as we try to proceed in our spiritual life. It's like we know we're not the house, we're not the car, we're not the body, we're not the institution, but all of these things we are associated with. And our life is so much based on how we identify as we are using or connecting with such things. So when there's the self-esteem, then there's the pursuit for self-actualization, or for something higher, something beyond just the normal orthodox scheme of things. So even modern scholarship, even mundane thinking is based on the physicality. Emphasize that people go through these kinds of changes, they have these sort of needs, and they're in a hierarchy. The most gross, the most basic, the most fundamental is just the pursuits of physical stimulation, pursuits for food, and etc., and shelter. And then a little more subtle psychological self-esteem, socialization, self-esteem, and then self-actualization. One is trying to pursue something beyond just the self as an entity struggling for survival. And of course, in the Vedic paradigm, we have that there's Anamoya and Pranamoya and Galamoya and Vijnanamoya. It's something quite similar. That an institution, a society, or even go further back, an individual, as well as an institution or a society, we can evaluate its growth based on what things are most active, what things are most prominent, what level of activity is most dominant. And actually, most of the world hasn't gone past that of Pranamoya. Anamoya, again, is basic, looking for food and seeing things in terms of edibles and identifying alignments and association based on what one is eating, what is eatable. So many species, this is how they function. They see things in terms of egocentric perspective. They are in a particular polarity, looking to see what is eatable, etc. And then, of course, when that is somewhat satisfied, then there's the activity of protection. So the majority of the world, most national states, are not past that level. And even most people, because countries and nations are just an aggregate of people. So most people, most of their intention, their resources, go into concerns for protection. See, the most countries in the world, most of their finances are going for protection. Worldwide, the world spends something like only about $300 to $500 US to educate the average child. Something like $20,000 to $25,000 preparing, training, educating the average military personnel. And so obviously, how a person spends their money, whether it's an individual, whether it's a society, whether it's a national country, determines, it tells you what is important for them. So it's not shocking to us that there's so much combative energy going on the planet now. It's not shocking that there's so much focus on defense. So much alliance, I kill you, you kill them, they kill us, we fight together. This is how people's resources are basically being used. And so, if you want to know something about me, I want to know something about you, something about your family, and look at how you're spending your money. And I need to know what are some of your priorities. So we're at a tremendous difficult time in the world where there is so much kind of combative energy that's going on. See, as we get into the 21st century, the alignment of the planets, the stars, there's so much of that, the battle of Ku, etc. We see that people are so much fighting within themselves as their passions the lust is so much dominant and attacking and controlling their intelligence, overpowering their mind and their intelligence. And so we cannot have no sense of peace in a family or a nation. People do not have a sense of inner peace. We cannot have a sense of healthy coexistence if individuals within themselves are not coexisting in terms of a healthy integration of understanding that they are spiritual and that they have a body, they have a mind, they have an intelligence, they have senses. And that the body, the mind, the intelligence, the senses are to be used in helping to nourish the soul or allow the soul itself to be more dominant in one's existence. But in most cases, the fight is going on, and the senses are usually winning. So people are so much captured by greed, avariciousness, and lust. And that gets amplified and begins to affect the entire planet. And so it's very important at this time in history, as individuals are beginning to see how fragile that human existence is, for people to look and see what role that they have to play in this. Whether they're adding to the kind of incoherent and combative mentality that's sweeping the planet, the culture of deviation, culture of exploitation and manipulation, or whether their own life is eradicating or taking away from so much of the fragmentation. We've been discussing this a few times in radio and TV programs in a few other countries. Now, we're all different, and we are affected differently based on our previous karma, based on what we have brought into this world, and how we're codifying and receiving things at every moment. And it's quite amazing when you think of the heterogeneousness, the variegatedness of how Krishna has created so many phenomenal things that are so at the same time, in many ways, distinctly different, but then have certain universal inherent things that are similar. It's those inherent and universal activities and concerns that can bring the world together. It's not all the transitory relative things. Those can only help when people are able to have a God-conscious focus. The more there is diversity and there's lack of a strong nucleus, then the more there is fragmentation, and the more there is anxiety, and the more there is confusion. So the world is very diverse. There's a lack of a real healthy nucleus, even though many people profess to be God-conscious. But in terms of really honoring a deep spirituality, that's rare. So it becomes even sometimes quite common for people to align themselves with some type of religion. But often that's still like another expression of business. They are connected with a religious system, religious teachings, because they're still trying to get something material, and they're going now to God somehow, hoping that He can do it better than others have been able to arrange for them. And so it's still the same old form of thinking, all based on sense gratification, and all based on seeing things in terms of how one can use them for him or herself. So I was just, and the last chapter points to a chapter in the book, I'd like to share with you for a minute before I read these two articles. Stressing about how each person is different. So it's amazing how creative the Lord is. That Hamsavasa Pavavo Matakasavama Vajate, Iti Matavajante Man Buddha Bhava Samamataha. Although Krishna has created all the mature and spiritual things, at the same time, we see that he is outside of all his creation, and he made his creation so specific, so dynamic, so animated, with tremendous differences. And this will always be a problem when there is a lack of a strong nucleus. So we have a time in the world where there are so many massive differences and a lack of real deep spiritual connection. So that means those differences are naturally going to bring more and more problems unless people can complement, unite, honor unity with diversity by being able to serve each other in relationship to serving Krishna, serving God. Variety and heterogeneity is an integral part of material as well as spiritual existence. And it can be as complex and confusing where people are not constantly accessing essence. Like in spiritual organizations, that the more differences, also differences there are an integral part of existence, part is the nature of the soul. But where there's not a deeper spirituality, then the more that there are differences, then the more, again, this will bring confusion and will bring the opposite of what spirituality is about. It's about harmony and constant conscious raising. The confusion brings what? It brings a constant dismantling, and it brings anxiety and frustration rather than elevation of consciousness. So whether it's mature organizations or mature groupings, or whether it's religious, there's a tendency at this time in Kali Yuga that there is conflict everywhere. Because most people, whether they are religious or mature, most people are self-centered, and they do not go deep into their humanity or deep into their spirituality. And so it becomes more and more complex as differences threaten various people. But as we go deeper and deeper in our spiritual consciousness, we are eager to know and to associate with people who have deep spiritual consciousness that manifest by deep spiritual realization and by manifest by less and less attachment to sense gratification. So hypocrites in any religious system are hypocrites. Or those who engage in mixed devotion, and whatever their alignments are is mixed devotion. And they weaken the basic fabrics of spiritual life. They are an embarrassment to the great prophets and the great acharyas. And where there is deep level of God consciousness, there's certain kinds of distinct, universal, profound things take place in relationship to deep spiritual consciousness. So there's a lot of people with deep spiritual consciousness looking and aligning with other people of deep spiritual consciousness. There's more and more tendency for in and out group, whether it's ethnicity or whether it's based on commerce, based on education, or whether it's based on religiosity. So much of the planet is fragmenting based on fragmental myopic conscious beings. And so some of these kind of entities, they also enter more and more into religious circles, and they have often invested motive, and they act in ways to bring down humanity by bringing down one of the most significant things, people's connection with the Godhead. So this fragmentation is producing also extremists or fanatics. And so fanatics in any system, or hardcore fundamentalists in any system, do an injustice to the system. Because they're captured by the external and the physicality and the rituals, and they never enter into the deeper meaning of what the theology is. And because spirituality and religiosity is powerful, when it is abused, it becomes powerfully destructive. And so it's amazing that some of the greatest threats facing the planet now has to do with people who seemingly have some religious connection and commitment, while under the banner of religiosity, they're engaging in creating so much abuse to humanity, and that's on all sides. It's not that there's so much the good guy and the bad guy on one side or the other side, no. The international community and the international power players are so much more complex. And so when there is so much misuse of resources that the Lord has arranged, and where there's so much exploitation, especially in the part of leadership, it brings all kinds of inauspicious karmic reactions. Just the other day, the Vice President in America was saying that something unprecedented is about to happen in America that has never happened before. And he's saying on national TV that we are likely to have more casualties within America than outside. Meaning that we're expecting to have more people who are likely to die within America than soldiers or others who are outside fighting the actual wars. As we keep hearing that these activities are going to take some time, it also is indicating that people are planning and expecting, and in some cases hoping, that it will take an extended amount of protracted time. And so as we look first at the differences, because we're so different, that makes it even more important why we have to come together on very substantive nucleuses so that those differences can complement and create synergy rather than creating fragmentation. So I was just writing in the section, or we'll write tonight, how, for instance, everyone's fingerprints. There's less than 1 chance in 64 billion that 2 people have the same fingerprints. You know, there's not that many people on the planet. That no 2 people have the exact same face. Even Siamese twins, they may look quite similar, but as you're around them, you realize, yes, there are distinct differences. The recorded voice, one is able to do electronically recording of one's voice patterns. We'll find that no 2 people have the same recording. Voices are different. And handwriting, totally different. Although, of course, expert forgers can sometimes come close, but just as people do not have the same fingerprints, not have the same voice patterns, not have the same handwriting, we can see that people's smell also distinctly different. A bloodhound can pick out 1 person out of a million based on the smell. Our brain waves are totally different in each particular person. Certain common brain patterns, but in general, as we examine one's brain closely, the thought patterns, interpreting things, reflecting, that there will be differences in how the emanations take place. That human infants, they are born with unique rhythm and sleeping patterns and waking patterns. A newborn baby breathing patterns is distinct. And we know, of course, every cell in the body contains molecules of DNA, which gives us the blueprint for the entire body. And each person's situation is different. Even the irises in our eye, they're totally different in each particular person. So there's so much about just our physiognomy that's so different. What to say about mind, of how we think, based on what has been our previous karma, or karma, things that are unfolded, things that have not unfolded, affects how we think, based on what we're trying to do with our particular bodies. So with so many kind of differences, even with our physical body, it becomes even more important for human civilization to excel auspiciously, that people constantly able to be sensitive to the things that are common, that are universal. Nothing is more common and universal to all of humanity than our ultimate spirituality. Because we realize that we're all coming from that same one God, Mata Pradanamani, everything is resting upon that same Supreme Personality of God. It's interesting what's happened though, and we want to read this briefly, because there are a lot of people on the planet now who are so much in fear, they're having nightmares. There are a lot of people who are being put into mental institutions because of mental breakdown due to traumas. There are people who are more prone to suicide because they become like existential, they become more depressed, based on seeing that so many things they're dependent upon are not as secure as they expected. There are a lot of people who have a lot of high aspirations, and they're feeling some insecurities now based on the economic situation, based on recession, based on losing their jobs. But there are also millions of people who are beginning to access a deeper religiosity. Anytime something of a crisis nature takes place, it has a way of bringing the best and the worst out of people. And where there is piety, we'll see the people will galvanize in an amazing way. And how, they will show a greater sense of humanity. Just as with spirituals also, it's times of difficulties that you really see what a person's conscience really is, how deep their spirituality is. It's not when everything is going nice, when everything is secure, or when facilities are there, when there are no problems. You see deeper spirituality when there are complexities. Then it shows what the person is really about. And when the foundation isn't strong, then when there are complexities, then that comes out more. And that is the nature of love. When there is real love, the more that there are difficulties, the more people connect on a deeper internal level, because they genuinely care about each other. And when there is not a deep, profound caring, then so many variables cut the binds that were supposedly there in connecting people together, which means that the connection wasn't very strong, that it could be severed so easily based on certain transitory things that have now come into one existence. And this is why we see right now there are thousands of people who have divorced since September 11th. And there's also tens of thousands of people who have made their relationships more serious. There are articles and news discussions about this. There are people who now have tried to become serious in their relationships, realizing that their partner or their lover or whatever could leave them or they could leave. They're looking close now at life, at experiences, at associations. And so for the pious, this is helping them, bringing out, speeding them up in some ways in their evolution. And for the impious, then the insecurity is causing them to act more animalistic. Well, here's a nice article, at least discussing how some people are trying to make deeper connection with God and take shelter. The weekend after the September 11th attacks, lines to enter some New York City synagogues would round the block. Churches were packed with standing room only crowds. Mosques filled up, and Buddhist centers that normally host small collections of people for quiet meditation were certainly overwhelmed. People have come here to seek peace, said Kajitsu Nakagaki of the New York Buddhist Temple on Manhattan's Upper West Side. But with so many people, it was sometimes a little less than calm. Like no other time in recent history, Americans got religion. A Gallup poll showed that 47% of respondents said they had attended church or synagogue in the last 7 days. A level rarely seen since the 1950s. A Harris Interactive poll found that 82% of Americans prayed or attended religious services the week of the tragedy. But now, 3 weeks after the attacks, crowds in places of worship have been tampering up. And while religious leaders hope that some of the new attendees will stick around, scholars are divided about whether the surge in interest in religious sanctuaries will last. See, it's unfortunate. Some people, they don't take things seriously until there's some kind of crisis. You know, it's unfortunate that this happens to many people, the way they think, the way they function. Some type of trauma, some type of crisis happens in their life, then they start taking things a little bit more serious. They take things less for granted. It happens sometimes in our devoted community also, that we take so many things for granted. One day we don't have it, or one day it's not quite the same, then we look a little closer. Attendance of the first Sunday was huge. A place for ritual community. A religion professor, John Benton, said, at the University of Oregon, argued that religious services have provided ritual and sanctuary at a time when both were desperately needed. But he said this doesn't necessarily mean that thousands of people have suddenly decided to become regularly observant. My guess is that most, quoting his professor, my guess is that most people who've gone into churches and synagogues haven't had their beliefs changed. They're going for a ceremony to show grievance and for community. There's no doubt that Americans consider themselves a religious people. And this is one of the reasons why America has prospered in many ways, because the country is based on a theocracy. But it's also one of the reasons why America is going down fast. We're going to see in the next decade how America is going to go down extremely fast. And it has to do with what we find all over the world as empires rise and empires fall. And we'll notice that so many empires fall as the aggregate of citizens' activity become more and more sinful. If you look at the fall of the Greek and the Roman Empire, you see that people were literally enjoying themselves to death. And we're at a time now where this is happening with so much of the Western powers. And so a lot of this that's going on is also showing that the big powers are not quite what they supposedly are, and that so much destabilizing will go on due to unhealthy foreign policy, unhealthy sinful activities, or giving permission for some of these sinful activities. This is the amount of cows that are being killed in so many other countries. This amount of the illicit sexual activities, legalized such things, legalized gambling, is in itself enough to bring all kind of inauspiciousness. Just any one of these, or to say of all of these. I think there's an increasing notion in this country that religion is my own private thing. It's interesting that outside of the church, people have few places to gather, and sit together and talk with one another. People have also used religious centers as places to coordinate aid. Churches, synagogues, temples, and mosques have collected food, clothes, and other needed items. What happened after September 11th is what I call a seismic event, says Mark Marty, professor emeritus at the University of Chicago, a religious scholar. Quote, "There's no way Americans can arrange their lives in the same way. As long as non-religious leaders can convince people they're offering the fabric of meaning you cannot get anywhere else. Then someone will say, assuming that more people may be turning to religion for spiritual guidance, groups have begun quickly to reach out and show what their faith can provide. Representatives of the Baptists, the born-again Christians, Jews for Jesus, Scientologists, Episcopalians, Hare Krishnas, and other followers were present in significant numbers near Ground Zero and at memorial services on the days following the attacks. Some churches took paid advertisements and newspapers announcing the services." Now, let me read another 2 paragraphs. This is from the Matchless Gift newsletter. And there's a nice editorial reflecting on this event also. Let me share this with you briefly. Since the horrific events of September 11th, we have all lost something. See, the whole world changed. The world is always changing every day. But the whole world made a huge change on September 11th. That all over the world, listening and tuning in to the events, reflecting on what has gone on since then, all over the world there is a shift. The shift in realizing, of course, the vulnerability, that even some of the most greatest situations are vulnerable. There's a shift in people realizing that this could have happened to me, happened to one of my loved ones, happened to my family. There's a shift in people realizing that it might happen to them or to their loved ones, etc. There's a shift in realizing there's no place, there's nothing that you can say is based on materialism that is categorically secure. Doesn't matter what. As we see finance, one of the chief capital of finance being attacked, and the number one defense institution in the world. And material culture is so much based on money and defense. We said several times, the number one business in the world is illicit and pharmaceutical drug business. The number two business is defense. We have gained a deeper recognition that we are connected to each other by faculty of body, strength of heart, and dependence on God. So many people are now connecting deeper with each other. And hopefully in different spiritual organizations, this is even more so. Those passing us on the sidewalk, now the opposite is there also. People are more fearful. I noticed since this happened, I was just coming, I think 6, 7 different countries since September 11th. And each time on the airplane, we shocked to see how easy the people were. Sometimes you jump up too fast, and somebody goes over here and knock her. People get nervous. You go to the front of the restroom, and everyone's looking over at you. It's kind of like you see little heads almost in the aisle. Look, unbelievable, just the fear that individuals have. And in England, the two places where there's a heavy concentration, of Muslims, you can just see when they pass by that many eyes can watch the person and wonder, is he going to get on my plane, or is he perhaps a terrorist, etc. So, of course, this is unfortunate because if people are having such fear, then that spills over into the atmosphere. And especially weak-minded people, their minds get bombarded by such, and they internalize so much of this unhealthy type of mindset. This is why, like whenever, say, a famous person commits suicide, some great event happens, that you'll find that it's repeated, and many people will get affected by it because people with weak minds, that their minds are imposed upon by such. If a famous entertainer committed suicide, you'll find in the next couple of months that dozens of people will commit suicide. So now there are people whose minds are not so strong because there's so much a culture of anxiety, aggression, and fear that they are finding within themselves that they're feeling very aggressive, or they're having greater phobias and paranoias. We'll talk about that in a minute because as we conclude, that's why it's so important that we strengthen our mental culture, especially at these times. Those passing us on the sidewalk or stopped at traffic lights and the cars next to us are no longer strangers, but they're people who we care about, we wonder about, and we feel less alone in their company. Now this is written from New York, and I guess it's even more pronounced there. In sorrow, we reached for each other and together we turn to God. I just heard in the last few days how, there are people who saw some of the events on September 11th. And they're still undergoing all kinds of trauma. And some of the fire and others, medics who participated in trying to rescue others, just to be around an area where there's all this horrible smell constantly of dead bodies and body parts, all over the place. You think of that they only found a few hundred bodies. We're still talking about thousands of people. That means that there are organs and body parts in so many different places. So the people could not be identified because the body parts are in there. Some people say at one point it was just raining body parts. We live in a treacherous world that can bring harm at any moment. Treachery is rooted in those qualities that originally alienated us from the Supreme Lord. Envy, selfishness, desire, and fear. Sometimes we see those qualities in the faceless enemy, sometimes in the enemy. We rarely see them in ourselves, but they are there. When our complacency is shaken as it was on September 11th, we see love, bravery, and devotion to God in the hearts of others. and more clearly see the fear and envy in our own. What does such a moment give us? Hopefully a recognition that life is short, that we must not waste the precious moments that are given to us. Human life, last paragraph here, human life is meant for developing an attraction to Krishna, the Supreme Lord, and serving Him with love and devotion. The Gita tells us, in this endeavor there is no loss or denuding, and a little advancement in this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Krishna is waiting for us to turn to Him. At times of distress, we realize the place of our fragility and weakness. How much we need Krishna. Krishna promises those who always worship Him with exclusive devotion, meditate on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack, and I preserve what they have. So, of course, spiritual-minded people should always be in the mindset that everything is temporary. Should always be constantly trying to go deeper into understanding how to be better servants of humanity and servants of the Lord. And should know that everything is secondary except that which is connected with transcendence. So secondary things should be given that kind of attention. Secondary things should not be given the attention that you give the primary spiritual concerns. And see, one of the more difficult areas to deal with is our minds. You know, it's quite awesome how sometimes as we progress in our spiritual life, or go on from day to day, that there are times when we feel that we kind of understand certain things. It's often to find out that we don't, or there's so much more to understand. I've been thinking so much these last few years about the power of the mind and the influence of the mind. But practically every month, just seeing more and more just how strong that the mind is. And how much what we are as spiritualists is determined based on what is happening with our mental culture. Just 2 weeks ago in Russia, I was giving a seminar. Well, I actually gave 2 seminars. But one of the seminars I gave was on prayer, another one on accessing greater faith in Krishna, and accessing greater sense of forgiveness. And so each day, I would have many interactive exercises. And it was difficult because I had 1,000 people in the class, but I was still trying to find ways to get the devotees to apply the philosophy more, to lead with meaningful experiences so that by the time we finished the week's class, there would be a distinct transformation. That the majority of devotees could feel that there was a transformation in their consciousness. Because we want to know philosophy, we want to live it, we want to experience the results of the process. So often the devotees are not experiencing deeper results, and so therefore their faith is weaker and weaker, or they're more prone to various difficulties that are sometimes almost unavoidable. The institution just has so many problems, whatever institution it is. So, one of the exercises I asked the devotees to do is I requested them for the week that we were together, just to start noticing much closer what was going through their mind. Just to take notice for 1 week. That's not an easy thing, even for 1 day. But just to start watching what major thoughts will come into your mind. Because what we're thinking is gradually what we begin to speak, is how we begin to act, thinking, willing, feeling. We watch our thoughts because we know they become speech. Watch our speech because it becomes actions. Watch our actions because it becomes habits. Watch our habits because it becomes character. And so it all starts with the thinking process. And so bad actions and bad speech and bad actions, which brings on bad habits, has to all do with what's going on. So sometimes we let so much stuff, so much garbage, and so many things constantly filter through our mind and sometimes stay. We let so much that we imbibe that we act upon constantly and unconsciously. And then we wonder why the senses are more difficult to control, or we wonder why we find ourselves sometimes stuck. And we go month to month and year after year without advancing deeper in our spiritual life. We look and see we're still thinking about the same kind of things. We're still thinking about the same kind of attachments. That most of our life energy is going toward reflections that are incarcerated. And because of that, we don't grow sufficiently in our spiritual life. So ask them, just take a day, we try to do it for a week, and just notice what kind of things is going through the mind. And I said, now as you see and experience many unhealthy things that's going through your mind, then do two things when you find yourself having such experience. One, thank Krishna for showing you what things you need to work on. Two, make a short prayer. Because this seminar was on prayer. We're trying to get the devotees to focus more on Bhadana. Because yes, we chant Hare Krishna, but what is the quality of our chanting and what is going on with the rest of the day? So if we don't harness the mind sufficiently, then it means so much of the mind is connected with unhealthy things that get us into acting unhealthy. So the mind is irrational. The mind is our greatest friend, our greatest enemy. So unless we learn how to harness the mind, then the mind will keep dragging us into unhealthy situations. And we'll find constantly things are not quite happening the way we expect them. Because we are fueling ourselves with that which is unhealthy with some kind of leak out by accepting things that are not good for our spiritual growth. And so actually, just to start reflecting. And notice, just be more mindful. The idea is to become more and more so our whole existence is a prayer. That our eating, our sleeping, our walking, our talking, that everything becomes a service to the Lord and offering to the Lord. And that comes from being more mindful. That we don't just eat. We don't just mechanically say the prayer. We don't just mechanically walk here, walk there. We don't just mechanically associate with somebody. But the idea of quality so that we're mindful. We're developing a deeper mental culture that has its way to counteract so much of the negative mental culture that is sweeping the planet. If you're trying to swim upstream and the current is going down, then it means it's going to be very difficult. Unless you really accelerate. So with so much negative current based on what's happening in the global community, in the material institutions as well as sometimes the spiritual, there is need for one to have a greater sense of acceleration by greater mental strength, by greater focus, which then allows them to penetrate more into the modes of material nature. And so we cannot maintain a certain mental culture like a soldier having small weapons, while now the adversary's weapons are stronger and stronger. So the forces of aggression, the forces of sin, of Maya, etc., are getting stronger and stronger. In order for one to survive, one has to also become greater in their particular determination, perseverance, and in their focus. Otherwise, we'll see. People become casualties in different ways. Or they somehow will just feel stagnant. And spiritual life is always about growth. Anything that's genuinely spiritual is constantly unfolding. It's constant growth. It's a richness of unfolding animated love. And when there's lack of true spirituality, then we find either a stagnation or a de-escalation. So in our conscience, if we are stagnant or we de-escalating, it means that somehow we have to look closer about accessing the science. If we're the same Krishna consciousness now as we were 6 months ago, as we were last year, as we were 2 years ago, something is wrong. What to say if we have gone backwards? Something is definitely wrong. Doesn't matter whether there are wonderful things happening around us or difficult. That as we go deeper in our spirituality, those things will constantly accelerate us and help us to become more determined and more eager to get the mercy of the Lord. Good things will encourage us. negative things will stimulate us to be more careful, which will also act as a form of encouragement. We find so many spiritualists becoming stagnant or going backwards and beginning to take on some of the habits that they had simply given up, then it means that such spiritualists are cheating themselves. It doesn't matter what's around you. We all have things happening to us around us that we cannot control, but we can always control our own reaction. So if someone is in Maya, it is their own ultimate weakness, because it has to do with how they are receiving or codifying or relating to what is around them. Material life is always different, a place of different kinds of complexities and difficulties. That never stops. Even when the great Acharyas, even when the incarnations come, they also experience around them so many of the complexities. So who are we if we think we're not to experience such? And when such come, then we use that as a reason not to follow the principles of devotional service, or we use that as a reason not to give up sense gratification, or we justify going back into sinful things because of what somebody else did or something that happened around us, this place, that place. That is not an excuse. It may identify a situation, but it does not justify it. When we give in to such, then that's due to our own weakness. It means that's where we are weak. But it all starts with what is first going on in the mind. So we have to notice, look a little closer at what thoughts are going through. And of course, the next day when some came, we started other interactive things, and we were asking for some feedback, first from that homework assignment. The devotees were shocked to just take notice of what kind of things we're constantly thinking. Statistics in America, this is secular world, that the average American man is thinking of sex every 30 minutes. We think of all the kind of things, of the fears we have, of the phobia, of the anxiety, of the enviousness, of the jealousy, all of these things. So we find these thoughts coming in our mind, we can, oh, thank you, Krishna, for showing what we can work on. Thank you for helping me to look a little closer at things I need to make adjustment in my life. Why well, just to make a slight prayer. As a way of now focusing some of that mental energy at the lotus feet of the Lord through the prayer. See, often we do not take shelter of prayer sufficiently because we don't feel sufficiently the dangers that are constantly being imposed upon us. Or do we access enough gratitude that we are constantly making expressions showing our gratitude for what Krishna, what God is doing in our life. And so we move through environments mechanically, systematically, mechanically, while Maya is being more and more cunning and cunning. See, if we don't harness the mind and plan and agitate the mind for growth, then the mind will be agitated by the mind. So, there's 3 or 4 other short things that I'll open up for questions. The first was thinking about how we can always go deeper in our prayers and understanding, of our spiritual commitments, of our philosophy, and of our involvements with our families, with our communities. So you're constantly trying to think, how can I be more fully present? How can I serve this person deeper? How can I have greater appreciation for what the Lord is arranging in my life? When I started doing this myself, I wanted, to not ask other people to do something that I'm not able to do myself. Then some time back when I was doing this kind of exercise, one of the things I noticed was how my mind so expertly is always trying to find something to complain about. I was just amazed at how my mind would work overtime. Even if things were going nice, the mind would just try to find some fault, something to complain about, so that it can go into a certain comfortable space that it's used to. Well, similarly, we can use our minds and constantly reflecting on so many things that we can be happy and enthused about. Everyone, doesn't matter how difficult our situation is. And we have so many things in our life that we can just be so joyful of what Krishna has arranged. But many of us, we get so much into a pity party, we get so much into a mood of depression and a lack of acceptance and appreciating the things that are and have happened wonderfully in our life, that we just put ourselves in a very morbid and gloomy kind of consciousness. Sometimes we're so fearful about the future that we don't really experience and enjoy the present. We're so worried about what our financial situation is going to be next year. We're so worried about what our relationship is going to be 2 years from now. We're so worried about what's happening to the institution 6 months, 5 years from now, that we don't have a chance to really connect with what is presently there. We're so worried about what's going to happen to our health, 5 or 10 years from now, that we bring on their health because of the mindset. I mean, there's really not such a huge difference between our past, our present, our future. We think about it, things are going so fast. Sometimes you may have to look at some of your old papers or pictures in the past, or you reflect on some things you did 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, and you realize, in one sense, how time has gone so quickly. That just 25 years ago, some of us were like 25 or 20 years. And now, 50 years, some of you 30, and some of you have been in society 10 years, 20 years, 30, etc. You realize, my God, years have gone by so fast. And just as years went by so fast in some ways, before we know it, 5, 10, 15 years from now, we'll have caught with that, and so many other things will have happened in our life. But what's going to happen in our near future, in our far future, is all based on what we do right now. What we do right now is preparing for our future. What we did a few years ago has produced what's happening to us now. If we've been a little more careful a few years ago, realizing that it's going to produce what's happening to us now, we would have been a little more careful in harnessing our mind and harnessing our activities with more sense of focus, more sense of direction. And so we all have that kind of power right now to make some difference in what our future is going to be. We all are making our futures right now. One of the things that's quite important as the mind accelerates is how to avoid it or how to not be influenced by it. And it is very difficult if the mind is idle or the mind is mechanical. But it's also difficult if someone does not have some sense of goal or project orientation. Maya has so many projects in so many ways how to try to destabilize human civilization. Sometimes it's amazing to see the number of spiritualists who have no sense of goal, no sense of project. And they think they're going to be Krishna conscious just by doing things mechanically every day. It doesn't work like that so easy. Especially when most of our minds are basically so much geared toward the conditional scheme of things, and will more likely go back to those if we're not careful. And so in order for one to move fast in their spiritual life, then there's a need for motivation, there's a need for stimulation, which has a lot to do with goal setting. Even materialists understand this. But you have to have goals, and you have to have targets, and you have to check in and take inventory so that you can see how you're doing, and that you constantly get feedback from others. Sometimes we are impersonal, even though we're spiritualists, and we don't get sufficient feedback to see how we're doing based on what we're supposed to be doing as servants of the servant. So you want to know. Even if those who give you feedback, you feel that it's not what you feel you are or who you are, it's important because what you are as well as perception is important in a spiritual community. Because we all affect each other, and we have the right to do things that will inspire each other in our spiritual life. We're not the International Society for Yoga, or for Jnana, or just knowledge, or just for austerities in the body, or just for rituals. but it's a society for bhakti, for devotion. So bhakti is about culture. It's not about somebody with emotional consciousness, where he or she is trying to save themselves, or save their families, or even save their own institution. It's about the culture of bhakti. Bhakti is not limited to any particular project. It's not limited to any particular person, any particular community, even any particular planet. It is the science of reciprocation with the Godhead. It is the ultimate activity, the dynamic activity of the soul. So how do we become mature bhaktas if our practice is often inimical to the science of bhakti? If our practice is about our self-centered material or psychological concerns, if our practice is only about our own so-called religious or spiritual growth, we say to hell with others. If our practice is only a minded or a sectarian scheme, how can we connect with the wholesome, divine, supreme personality of Godhead and we're approaching in a mood of sectarianism with greed and lust and avariciousness and a lack of strong devotion and focus? Ultimately, we see the science of bhakti is about lawless love, where the love is so deep and so rich that it is not confined by bureaucracies, it is not confined by structure, it is not confined by fears, it is not confined by enviousness, by lust, by greed, by anger. In many countries I went to, we just finished a 34-country tour. In several countries I gave seminars on forgiveness. And going through the scriptures and showing how so many cases of our great personalities show not only do they forgive, but they often elevate the offender. That not only do they forgive, but often they use it constantly and glorify Krishna more. They do not allow themselves to even be their enemy's enemy. And so in our minds, if we're having somebody who's our enemy, then you are a fool. And you are cutting off your own devotional line by such. To the degree that we see people as our enemy, the degree that we are categorizing and acting as such, then it means we carry that kind of energy within our mind, within our consciousness, and it's eating away from our own spiritual acceleration. We should not even come down to the level of those who may even try to be your genuine enemy. Why give them the opportunity to really to harm you by coming down and entering into that kind of consciousness? But it means that such person is captured by the duality themselves, because in their mind they're so much absorbed in such, and therefore they think and they act based on such. And so now we see in this global community so much aggression, where attack and counterattack and acceleration and alliances that are so artificial. These alliances, international alliances, are so artificial, where people who hate each other's guts are coming together just based on utilitarian and opportunistic concerns. And a lot of them are going to fracture in time. We see several countries in Yugoslavia where different alliances, and so they fight together for a while, and then those who are friends, who are in alliance, break up, and they become enemies. This is the kind of thing that's happening now in this multipolar world order, where we have situations where people, groups of powers are posturing for invested interests. And so many countries are hating America's policies, even some of those who are joining with them. They're just looking at the bullying effect that the American foreign policy is now having. And therefore, there's great danger in the future as Europe becomes stronger and as China is watching all of this. So the world is in a very precarious time. But then, what people can take to spirituality, or they can enter more into the mood of aggression and anxiety that's sweeping the planet. And you'll see that people are divorcing now, who've been together for 20 and 30 years. People are experiencing more fears and anxiety, and at the same time, the opposite is happening. It determines what's going on in our minds. It determines to what polarity that we attach ourselves to. More of the side where there's trying to be a sense of harmony and recognizing the universalities and the fragilities and coming together based more on a God conscious platform, or getting into more of the mood of fragmentation where others or those such people are not really ready to honor the humanity and the spirituality of others. So, three things. Be very healthy in these times. And we're saying to you and to our TV audience also. Prayer, and this means not just praying for material things. Why should we go to God just for material things, like shopping in the supermarket? But really getting more into the mood of, dear Lord, thy will be done. Having a sense of goal setting or project orientation as you are involving yourself toward your spiritual activities. Having certain things that you are trying to put your energies into in some systematic way that you can push yourself and that you can keep being motivated moving towards such. And you can take inventory and check in to see how you're doing. And most important, at the end of the day, simplicity. At the end of the day, as we're going on with many, many challenges, many difficulties, successes and failures, at the end of the day, realizing that ultimately we are to act as if everything depends upon us, but realize that ultimately it is up to the Lord. To act with great effort, but at the same time to be begging for the mercy. At the same time, to take whatever our duty, our service, our situation is most important, but to simplify and avoid a sense of arrogance and sectarianism. At the end of the day, we do whatever we can to realize that ultimately God wants our love. And he doesn't really need anything. He's Atmaram, but he wants our love. Many times our problem is that we're too much focused on ongoing complexities. And because of that, we do things on the surface, and we miss the simplicity and the sweetness of bhakti. So it doesn't mean to be inactive. It doesn't mean to lead a complex life. But it means at the end of the day, to bring it all back to where it is most healthy, to simplify. And just come, host with a great sense of submissiveness and humility at the lotus feet of the Lord. In the sense of, dear Lord, you know what is best. I know what I want, you know what I need. And therefore I do various things, but if this is not best, if this is not the best place for me to be, this is not the best service, not the best activity, then you put me in a situation that will help me to serve you best, put me in a situation that will help me to grow faster, put me in a situation that will bring me to you faster. At the end of the day, we simplify this and ask the Lord, I am yours, and you do with me as you like. Since I know that you are ultimately my greatest protector, my greatest well-wisher, and you're ultimately my greatest lover. And so if we can think in this way, then even the most complex situations that's happening in the global community, it's happening with our own families, or in institutions, happening in our own mind, that they will not become overbearing. We will not be inactive or impersonal. We don't just wait for Krishna to make things happen. Nor are we calling imams of an orientation that we're just trying to do things, but there is a healthy medium where we are to do like anything. But at the end of the day, we must have that kind of mental culture that just says, Lord, if this is not what is best in helping me become a you, then stop it, change it. If this is not the best connection, the best situation for me, then you just put me in a situation that will allow me to be a better servant of yours. The world is too dangerous, things are too critical, and life is too valuable for us to not try to take more advantage of perfecting this human life by putting it up to God. Realize that you were there, and therefore you made certain promises, and now I present myself to you. Now, very last thing, which is quite common discussed these days, but let us bring this out as a conclusion. And I think I brought this in the seminar in Croatia as a way to bring closure to a workshop. And I just asked the devotees to think, many things we see how we see ourselves. We see ourselves in so many different ways. Others sometimes see us in that way, sometimes don't. But we know, and we have it now. The other day, one of our godbrothers from Blumenau passed, another godbrother in Mexico and Argentina. I mean, we're at a time now where our family, our father and mothers, family members are leaving the body. There's many devotees in the 40s, 50s. And now we're coming to a time when we start leaving our bodies. The average lifespan in America is 70-something. Now there's some countries, I was just reading an article yesterday that in 10 years, they're expecting the average lifespan in Zimbabwe to be 27 years. There's 3 or 4 countries now, right now, the average lifespan is 40, it's going down. And so unusual things are happening in the world, involved in disease, and the combative activities, etc. And then, of course, Mother Bhumi, a living entity. And so what's happening in one part of the world eventually has some effects in other parts of the world also. So we ask in conclusion, and we should leave this with you, that, we just consider that life has left us, and we find ourselves that we have gone, the soul is gone, or the body is there, the soul is in some ability to perceive the body. That's my cue, stop singing. So we'll end with this. But just imagine, you've heard it, just think about it even more deeply. That if you were able to look in on your funeral, so there is devotees, family members, others who are there mourning your departure or honoring your departure. Now we all know that this moment will come to us. This shows we take birth, we also have to make the transition. And we know we're here temporarily. So what would we like to have done, or like to have people to say about us, think about us, once now that we are no more in this physical existence? And so we realize nobody would like to have people say, well, that person made a lot of money. Well, the person was quite a survivalist, and they were just so self-centered that somehow things worked out for them, and they enjoyed. The person was very famous, but nobody really liked him very much. I mean, you wouldn't like people to say, well, I remember them that they had this real big house, and that's all. I mean, so many things that we strive for, we take it so important. We really don't want to be known, or we don't want our identity to be associated only with such. But this will be our case. That what we're doing now, and what we continue to do, will be the way that we will have left this world, and also the way that people will see us. So the things that we really feel we'll be happy to hear individuals say about us is the kind of things that we should work on now to put them into motion so that it becomes a reality. We would all love to hear people say, well, he's a very kind-hearted person. She was really there, when we needed her. He was very strict, and my own faith was increased by his spiritual strictness. He was the kind of person who was so obviously dedicated, to the mission of the spiritual master. He was just a wonderful father. The way he took such wonderful care of his wife and children. He had such a healthy balance of his spiritual life and how he dealt with his material concerns. She was amazingly chastric and maintained a tremendous sense of chastity and purity. They brought up the most amazing children. I was always amazed just seeing how wonderful that their children were. They gave me more and more faith in the process of Krishna consciousness. This person, even when they didn't have anything, they somehow were so eager to share what they did have. Even when they were facing with so many problems, somehow they were just thinking of Krishna and always ready to talk to others about Krishna. I mean, it's these kind of things. Not that, well, he was a devotee, but his existence always created problems. She was a devotee, but she was never really loyal to anybody or anything. Been married 5 times. no, no one would be happy. And we just letting people remember them in such ways. But how happy we would be in knowing that our existence on this planet, that we fulfill what human life is about. Not only that, but we left a legacy. And that legacy is the people are speaking about and living on in that way. And especially we pass it down to our children or to the future generation. We all have a responsibility to allow our children to inherit much more than we did ourselves, materially and spiritually, especially spiritually. We have a duty to try to create an environment where it gives more a sense of encouragement for our children to say yes to spiritual life. Because we're all seeing, as years go on, it becomes more and more difficult, especially for the young folks, in trying to live a life of ethics, morality, and spirituality. And how much more difficult it is if we, as the elders, the parents, etc., do not provide them greater avenues. And so we're all leaders and all important in that way because we are affecting the future. So let us be careful not to be a part of this kind of mental culture sweeping the planet now. It's aggression and fear and pointing at others, but to be more into the mood of seeing this, at how fragile that the planet is, human civilization, and to realize that although we do have many differences, which are quite serious, but we have the most important things that are similar. That we're spiritual beings, and we are all connected with the same Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is eagerly inviting us to come back. And we come back by gradually becoming less and less affected by the dualities. The more we're affected by the dualities, and the more we are warranting being a part of the environment of duality. So as we focus more on prayer, try to look in our lives and become a little more practical, goal-oriented, short and long term, and as we simplify things so that we are not putting ourselves away or from the shelter of the Lord as wonderful agents. We simplify, and it's like we remove some of the barriers that causes God's love not to come to you. I think and goal orientation, just trying to use one's body, senses, mind, intelligence. This is the process of Siddhartha Bhakti. We're trying somehow to use what we have and offer it back to Krishna. So, if we don't plan, Maya will plan for us.
So, my question is, for me personally, I feel like I've come a long way in my activities, having tried to follow the instructions of Srila Prabhupada and yourself. And my question is, how can I be sure that I'll be able to maintain that for the years as I grow and develop in the long term? I want to be able
There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. It's like when you're in school. How can you guarantee that you get a good grade for the person if you genuinely get good grades? A healthy paranoia and a healthy fear can be very productive and help you constantly try to strive for excellence, to constantly try to be a high achiever. Sometimes achievements are our worst enemy. There are times when we do something good, we do something successful, and that becomes our future enemy. Because of doing something successful, there are times when we take things for granted, or by doing something successful, we can think that we can keep on doing the same things even though situations and other variables may change. So therefore, we should always have this mood of humility and desperation as we try to follow the Ninefold process with as much attention as possible. We'll always realize that there are cycles and changes in our lives, challenges that come, and we want to be able to meet those challenges with preparation and a healthy fear. Often a good foundation, of course, initial foundation, can have a lot to do. Many times devotees have trouble later in their lives because they start off on such a weak basis. You start off in school on a weak basis. Later, when you have more complex things to do, it begins to show So we have good foundation, we keep on refining them. Just like, just like a community. Community is not something that just happens. You have to keep working on it. As you keep working on it, then it grows and unfolds. Same thing with most types of relationships. Not that they just put them together and now that's it. You have to keep working on it. So even more so in spiritual life. That's why I was saying that when we find that we are having similar kind of problems, or we're not growing month after month, year after year, then it means that we're not striving sufficiently, having enough fear of Maya, enough determination toward the goal. We have to look closer to see what's causing that, because the process works. So there's no guarantee, and that's the beauty. The beauty is that Krishna is responding to our desires. Your desire remains fixed to serve the Lord. Your desire remains fixed to not to fall down. You will never fall down. We fall down because the stronger desire we have is for the sinful experience. But our desires are influenced based on our associations, of course. So we should always be careful to try to have quality associations so that it helps to energize our desires in an auspicious way. Any other questions?
You were speaking about courts, and it was in my mind. Sometimes, how do we determine within ourselves who is the mind and who is the self, in the sense that with any decision we make, we can always justify. So that justification is that mind, is that
Well, this is why we say the mind can be our greatest friend or our greatest enemy, or the mind is more difficult to control than the wind. Often, the mind, sharper the intelligence is, if it's captured by the mind and the senses, then the more we will use that intelligence to rationalize deviations. So how do we avoid such? How do we get around such? This is why we have this threefold process of the Shastra, where we are now to engage the mind in worshiping the scripture, imbibing itself deeply with the intelligence, so that we are getting fed and seeing things through the eyes of the scriptures. This is why we are told to take advantage of healthy sadhu sangha, so that we have role models who we can interact with and talk with and check in. This is why we ask to take proper shelter, a guru. And so if we allow Shastra, especially because it is through Shastra that we understand what is sadhu and we understand what is guru. So especially through Shastra, if we embrace Shastra sufficiently, then we will be able to control the mind from its tendency for deviation. And when it does start deviating, we'll be able to bring it back. That's why we were mentioning this exercise, that there are times when we can't control the situation, because first we don't notice how grave and how serious it is. So we see sometimes how many things unhealthy is going through the mind, then we realize, the Paramount realize why we have to now replace it with more positive spiritual things, because it has so much flexibility and freedom that is going in unhealthy places. Or why we have to gently be able to direct it in a way that it becomes our friend rather than our enemy. You may want to try that exercise. Just do it for a couple of days. Just notice what thoughts are coming through your mind. You realize at the end of the day, the kind of things that you were thinking about most of the day. See if you're comfortable with what is mostly going through your mind. And if it's not, then realize this is why some of the spiritual stagnation is there. Because so much of what is being thought about, so much of the energy, so much of the life energy is going into areas that are not so beneficial for one's spiritual growth and acceleration. We can see it as a chance to pray more to Krishna, and a chance to thank Him for showing us what things we need to work on or to take notice of. And this way we want to be so involved with all this unhealthy mental stuff that then just moves us one or two last questions. See, we have the physical body, we know we have the subtle body. And our subtle body is much comprised of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And every external activity is having something to do with an internal counterpart. So whatever is going on in the mind is what we have. You say, well, in Kali Yuga, you're not responsible for offenses in the mind. Yes, we know that in earlier ages, the thinking and the actions are pretty much on the same level. But as we are thinking in a healthy way, it will also engender itself into speaking and acting improperly if we're not careful. So if we're thinking things too much that are inauspicious, and we should have great fear and realize, oh, this is part of the disease that's haunting me or attacking me that I have to really deal with. And once we find that so many of our thoughts are not thoughts of enviousness, not thoughts of lust, not thoughts of anger, not thoughts of fear, but are thoughts where we are just trying to see how to serve better, and thanking the Lord better, reflecting on the Lord's Guna Rupa Lila, we realize, oh, we're becoming more Krishna conscious. Because as we're having that, we'll also notice that we have less agitation. We'll also notice that we're less bothered by whatever's going on. Because our foundation is a lot stronger.
How does one understand what you meant by when you pray to Krishna, he knows what is best for us? First is not understanding God so much, or who doesn't have so much faith in God.
Often, the neophyte devotee is somewhat bordering on some kind of atheism. Because we do things that are sinful, as if God, Krishna, is not watching. We try to be too much the controller, as if the Lord doesn't love us, is not ready to protect us, is not going to fulfill His promise, that He'll carry what we lack and maintain what we have. So, faith, short heart, good heart, better heart, determined faith, is not so easy. It's not so easy when we've had so many experiences in the past that have been rewarding to us or that have been inauspicious. And so one may have to work a little harder on that, so such things can happen in their life space experience. But as we just study scriptures more, and that's most important, we have more determination realizing, now Krishna made these kind of promises. So let me do my promise, let me do my part. When we consider that the Lord is in the heart, He's literally there, and based on the fact that He's there, we have to find more and more ways how to stop interfering with what Krishna is trying to arrange and do for us. Practically, the whole process of devotional service is just coming to a point where we no longer are interfering. The whole process of spiritual acceleration is less and less interference on the part of the devotee. But in order to interfere less, it is not such an easy thing. When our mature life, our socialization basically has told us that we have to struggle for ourselves, and that life is all about eating, sleeping, mating, defending. It's not so easy to get around it. But as we start thinking differently and trying and working on it as a process, then we start acting differently. And then we're less controlling, and we're ready to let Krishna do the necessary. Each of us have seen that there are instances in our lives where we just let go. Just like Yoga, we just let go. And we saw that Krishna came through. Not let go with doubt or fear. We just let go and said, dear Lord, it's up to you. Dear Krishna, you just do what's necessary. We've all had those times and we've done that. And Krishna comes through. But still, we have fear. And that is the most, mature nature. So we become more determined if we're associating with those who are also more determined. Faith, devotion, bhakti is contagious and it spills over. So along with our own efforts, association is always part of the experience that impacts upon each person's consciousness. Someone becomes an offender, someone becomes an abhiding because they associate with people who are like that. You can have somebody who's a strong, say, deviant person. And your mind is weak, or you have certain tendencies, you will be influenced by it. You can have someone who is highly tendencies like anything. And if you are sort of neutral or a little weak, you'll pick up the mood of such a person. You'll pick up some of their mindset. You can associate with somebody who's very fixed in their devotion. And as you allow yourself to be in association, you will pick up some influence based on such. So what we're really looking at is one of our big problems is that each of us has to become stronger so we can have a greater impact on others so we can have a greater, stronger society. We're all into this. We all have a problem of the weaknesses or the strength of what is going on and what is not going on. And that's a problem. I gave so many courses on helping the to develop greater faith because I saw that there was a de-escalation of faith almost in every single project. And you can't blame it. You can't blame the boys of having faith getting weak when there's so many issues. Economic issues, social issues, institutional issues, global issues. And especially Shatu Bihava Jante Imam, that Shatu, 4 types of people who come to devotional service. Only the person who comes out of knowledge bounces back a lot faster and is a little less influenced by some of the complexities within their mind. That's only one type of person out of the 3 other 4 types. Three types, they're much more likely to be affected by whatever is going on in the institution and in the environment. One who comes out of knowledge, whether it's come a little easier. And so basically, most of those who are in our society, we're all influenced, of course, by association. There's no question. But some even more. There's some people, they will bounce back, and they will bounce back, and they will bounce back, and they will bounce back. You look at their Sukriti, young Sukriti, we see they come in with certain kind of credits, and there's more for the launch for knowledge, etc. So that will kind of ground them. But the majority of devotees, knowledge will not hold them in this society, will not keep them on in their devotion. It's like there are millions of people who smoke every day who know that it's bad for them. There are millions of people who drink every day who know it's bad for them. This is why it's not a process of knowledge, it's a culture. And so therefore, unless there is more of a supportive system, supportive environment, that the majority of people will get weak. And that's natural. That won't happen. So therefore, we all have to do try to live in such a way that there's stronger bhakti that spills over and do our part to create a stronger culture so that it will be more protective as one is struggling with his or her own battle of food sector. Okay, last question. And then we'll let you take this out. See, each person is having their own battle of food sector. And it's awesome. When we read Bhagavad Gita, it's not just Arjuna who's struggling with this tremendous situation that he's confronted with. Each of us, by being in the material world, we are having a battle of food sector. Now the question is, do we become cowards? Leave the battlefield? Do we underreact? Do we overreact? Do we go into denial? And that's each person's choice. Each person's situation is based on how they respond, based on their battlefield. Some people will desert, some people will become cowards in the sense that they will take shelter of Maya, mystique, Maya, sense gratification, sinful life. And they will encourage others to come, and now, let's enjoy it. And they will go back into intoxication, back into drugs and many things. Some people become cowards, they will still in the line, and they will encourage others to do so. And some will say, come on, let us go ahead, let us go forward. And so all of this is there, and it's expected. In war, there's always different things that happen. There are casualties, there's fear, there's stagnations, and there's also victory. We should not be surprised as we see this happen within our projects or our institutions.
What are some things we could do to help train our minds to become more positive and focused?
Well, first thing, we should chant our rounds more in the spirit that this is our own email, our own fax line in Krishna. We should chant our chance to associate with my spiritual master. Here's a chance for me to associate with my God family under Mahaprabhu's mission. Here's my chance to play my role in raising consciousness. Here's my chance to protect myself from the onslaught of some of the unhealthy things. We should personalize our involvement with the books, with the chanting, with the deities. And the more that we personalize our connection, the more that we experience more personal reciprocation. Not that we chant in the spirit that I made this commitment, this promise, and I have to do it. And somehow we work it in. Not that we read in the spirit that this is just, ancient history and what happened during, the time of the battle of the century. But that we not that we serve the deities and look at the deities in the mood, of somebody else's service, or in the mood that is a statue or brass or marble. But the more that we approach with a sense of humility and desperation. So we come in for the deity, and when there's darshan, we have darshan, either formal or our own. We come in for the mercy, that we cry out our hearts, and we pray, we talk, prayer, in the mood of offering ourselves. Narottam Das gives 10 different types of prayers, advice and we look at these, it's very powerful. So we use now the mind so that it goes in all these auspicious ways. And then what we're carrying is all this wonderful connection that the mind has allowed to enter into our particular being. Yeah, just remember that what we're thinking is what we're becoming. So look a little closer to see what our near future is going to be. Each of our near future is going to be based on what we're thinking right now, kind of things that we're thinking. So if we look a little closer and take more control of what we're thinking, then we can produce what we can be proud of and how we offer ourselves, to the mission of Srila Prabhupada. So, it's gone down the job.